All right, hey, what's up, everybody? We are live. So glad you're here. If you're coming in, let me know where you're listening from. My name is Brent. I am the jazz musician behind LearnJazzStandards.com. It's a jazz resource, a website for everybody to come and get free jazz education, whether it be from our blog, our tips from our blog, and our advice, our lessons, or from the LJS podcast, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm here to talk to you about our latest episode of the LJS podcast, episode 64, which is all about 5 tips for never losing your place in a jazz standard. We come out with a brand new podcast episode every single Monday, and you can find all of those at learnjazzstandards.com/podcast, or you can subscribe at iTunes. Pabita, nice to see you. Thanks for joining from Colombia. Yeah, guys, and if you're just coming into the group, let me know where you're listening from. Would love to see where everybody's coming from. You know, Learn Jazz Standards, we have a big community, and I want to hear where you're listening from. That'd be amazing. So drop me a comment while I'm talking. Scott, thanks for joining from Ovila, Texas. Jesse, thanks for coming into the group. Glad you guys are all here. Again, the LJS podcast comes out every single Monday, so be sure you check that out. We also do come out with them on YouTube too, since you guys are all on YouTube here. So just on our YouTube channel, every single Monday, we come out with them. Alexander from Rio, so glad you're joining. Nice to see you. Now, today's topic, if you're just coming in now, I'm going to be talking about 5 tips for never losing your place in a jazz standard. I'm basically summarizing a little bit of this week's podcast episode that we came out with, episode 64, which you can find and listen to the full thing over at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 64, episode 64. So I really hope you go check that out. And by the way, if you guys ever have any suggestions for podcast episodes, feel free to always leave them in the comments. I do check this stuff, or send us an email, learnjazzstandards.com/contact. That would be awesome. Roberto Pellegrini, thanks for joining from Italy. Really glad to have all you guys there. John Lanning, is that the John Lanning that I know? My student John Lanning? Maybe. Pilvi from Helsinki, thanks for joining. Really appreciate having you guys on today. Again, the full episode, learnjazzstandards.com/episode 64. But I thought I have a gig coming up in, well, I probably should get ready in like half an hour for my gig. It's a quartet gig on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. I live in New York City, just in case you don't know. That's a really fun gig. I always enjoy this gig so much. The players are so awesome. It's at a really cool speakeasy, so great drinks. It's always a really great time, and I'm just lucky to be able to play with these guys every single Tuesday here in New York City. So I'll be heading off to that soon, but I'm going to summarize this podcast episode for you. You know, this is a question that I've been getting a lot from people all the time about getting lost in jazz standards. It's a common thing. Some of my students talk to me about this too, and it's tough. And you know, I can remember when I used to get lost in jazz standards and as well. Nowadays, it doesn't really happen to me so much. I think it's just from experience, from playing lots of gigs. That really helps to not have that happen, and just being familiar with the songs, which is something I'm going to talk about in a second. But I do want to address this because this is something that I hear all the time. We had a survey recently with our newsletter, and you may have taken that if you're subscribed to our newsletter at, you can do that, by the way, at learnjazzstandards.com/newsletter. And one of the questions was just like, hey, what are you guys struggling with? What can we help you with? You know, how can we serve you? How can we, serve our jazz community here? And I saw that come up time and time again. I keep getting lost in my jazz solos in the middle of a jazz standard. So, you know, it's definitely a struggle everybody has. So I thought I'd go over 5 tips really briefly. I talk about this way more in the podcast, so be sure to check that out. But I'm just going to skim over the 5 tips that I talk about in that podcast for keeping your place, for not losing your place in a jazz standard. Now, the first one, it's not rocket science. It's familiarize yourself with the jazz standard, okay? Just get used to it, you know, and you'd be surprised how many students and folks come up to me and they're having this problem, but I find out that they haven't really spent the time on the song. You know, when they went to go learn the jazz standard, they just went straight to a recording and tried to get it onto their instrument right away. And that's really not the best way to go. What you want to be doing is listening to that song over and over again so that you know the melody forwards and backwards, and you're familiar with the different parts of the song. You know that song really well. And in fact, if you do that, you're going to memorize that jazz standard or that song you're learning much better. And so that's really the first step to just, having the leg up so that you don't get lost. Really spend a lot of time. And yeah, it can be easy to get lost if you're not really familiar with a song. Maybe if you're on a jam session or a gig and suddenly you just have to start playing a song that you don't really know very well, but everybody else knows it, it can be a little bit more challenging. But the more you know the song you're playing, the less likely it is you're going to get lost. So that's the first tip. Just familiarize yourself with the jazz standard and make sure you have really listened to it a lot. Okay, now the second tip I want to give you today is just to practice keeping your place. Okay, practice keeping your place. Now that sounds obvious in a lot of ways, but not really, because when it comes down to it, being focused is what you need to do to not lose your pace. So you have to practice being focused. So I think that there's a number of ways we can do this. One way is simply to work with a metronome. Maybe you've heard it from music teachers before that you should be working with metronomes, and I can't stress that enough, that yes, indeed, you need to be working with a metronome. And one exercise that I do a lot, and this is a place that you can start, especially if you are having a tough sense of keeping time. That's really something that a lot of more beginner musicians have struggling with jazz, keeping their spot, is their time is not quite put together, so it's easy for them to get lost. So you got to practice that with the metronome. So what you do is you start out with a jazz standard that you know really well, or maybe you can break it down even to like a chord progression or something like that. Something simpler, something digestible for you, whatever level you're at. And start the metronome on every single beat, clicking on every single beat. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you start that way. Try playing the melody, comping if you're a comping instrument, improvising a little bit to feel comfortable with doing that, with that time. Then move the metronome to just click on beats 2 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So that's the only clicks you're hearing. And do the same thing. Practice playing the melody, improvising, whatever you need to do. Then try switching it to beats 1 and 3, okay? All of a sudden that's going to feel a little different than 2 and 4. And what you're doing is you're building up your internal time. If you strengthen this internal time, it's going to be easier for you to stay focused, not get lost. Now what you can do after that is you can just do 1 click per measure. So this is where you're really trying to feel the time a little better. So you just every single, beat 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And you're keeping track through the song. So that's just a building point to build up to that. You could also put on other beats. Just have 1 beat on beat 2 or beat 3. I had a professor in college who he would do like the end of 3, So I don't do that, but that's a level you can build up to build up your time and get better at that. And then what you can also do too is like really stretch it out and do only 1 click every other measure, right? So it's just 1 click every other measure. That's really keeping you accountable with your time. And the stronger your time feel gets, the least likely you're gonna fall apart, that you're gonna lose your spot or anything like that. Now another thing you can do is just listen to jazz albums and jazz records that you know really well, or just jazz standards that you know really well. Let's say you put on, an album like Miles Davis's Kinda Blue, and hopefully you're familiar with some of those songs, and you just listen to it from the beginning and try to keep your place in the song, right? In all the songs that you're coming across. Try to keep your place and follow them throughout their solos. Okay, if you're able to track with that can really be helpful. And that's not even touching your instrument at all, right? That's totally separate from even touching your instrument. So that can be a really helpful practice as well. Okay, you guys tracking with me? If you guys have any questions, if I'm not addressing some of the things that you struggle with this topic, feel free to let me know. If you have any other questions that you think I can help you with, or anything to add, I'm the guy talking right now, but this is a jazz community, and I want to hear from you guys too, and you guys can help each other out. That's what I'm here to do, is just to facilitate. All right, so let me go on to the third tip that I have, which is map out the song. Okay, just map it out. that starts right after. Really, it's probably not in chronicle order I'm giving you these, because mapping out the song should come after you familiarized yourself with the song, you've learned the song. Now you want to figure out where are those key points in the song that you need to look out for. Ask yourself the questions. Is this a 32-bar form song? Is this a 12-bar form? Is this an AABA form? Does the bridge, does it change keys? Are there any differences between the two A sections? Different things like this that you want to look out for, and just map that out for yourself so that you're set up for success. So even if you do get lost, if you're playing with a band on a gig or a jam session and you do get lost, if you can hear those things, those little cues, those little checkpoints that you've set up for yourself, then you're going to be able to jump right back onto the wagon, right? So if you get lost, you can still fix it, and that's really important. If you do lose it for a second, just open up your ears and try to latch on. So map out the song, see if you can identify certain spots to look out for, things that help you. It's kind of like a roadmap, right? If you're trying to get from A to B, well, you have to figure out, different points in between that are going to connect you there. That can be really helpful to do. Okay, next tip is to feel the pulse. Earful Audio, thanks for joining from Canada, appreciate it. Feel the pulse. Now this is different from counting, right? We just talked a lot about counting, but feel the pulse. We want to graduate from counting to feeling. I had someone email me several weeks ago, and they were telling me that they had this exact problem. They were getting lost in their jazz solos in the middle of jazz standards, and it's really frustrating them, and I really felt for them. And you were saying basically that in order to keep the spot, they found that if they tapped the feet, if he tapped the feet, then he was able to keep his spot better. He was able to keep time better, and he would even use both of his feet to mark different beats. But the problem, he said, was that when he was standing up, which he has to do to perform a lot, he wasn't able to do that anymore, so it wouldn't work. Well, the problem that person was having is this not only physical, but mental roadblock for actually being able to feel the pulse, right? I mean, how can you improvise if you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's too hard to do. We want to graduate from counting to feeling, right? That's what we really want to do. And a lot of that can be gained by simply doing some of those metronomic exercises that I just talked about. That can be really helpful for doing that. And the other thing you want to do too, when it does come down to counting, a lot of people get lost at fast tempos when the time's going blazing fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What you need to do is slow it down in your head, right? So only count beat 1 of every single measure. So if I'm on a gig or a jam session and someone counts the song 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, immediately I'm thinking 1, 1, 1. I got to slow that down, and this, again, I'm feeling all those beats in between. But if I'm actually counting everything, right, it's going to be very anxious. I'm going to be like trying to play, and it's not going to work out. I can't keep time that way. I'm going to eventually fall off and slide off and not be able to get back on again. So you have to slow down that time for yourself. If you're playing a ballad or a slower tempo, that's much more appropriate, right, to count every single beat in your head, to feel every single beat. But when you're doing fast tempos, try to feel fewer beats. That can be really helpful, and also help you play better at those tempos, regardless of whether you're staying on or not. So now the last tip I want to give you, tip number 5, is just to become familiar with jazz harmony. Really keep listening to this music. Try to be able to identify what is a 2-5-1 chord progression, what is a 1-6-2-5 chord progression. What does it sound like when you go from the major to the relative minor key? If you can listen for those things, you're less likely to get lost because you're always hearing those things happening in the harmony. And if you can hear what's happening in the harmony, you'll know where you're at, right? The other thing is just to be listening for the melody, right? If you are always listening for the melody in your head, if you're playing that through your head, this happens in drum solos, right? If a drummer is playing a drum solo and all of a sudden you get lost, you have to be listening to the melody, right? You have to be constantly playing that melody in your head in order to stay on task. So just become more familiar with jazz harmony. That can happen through just lots of listening and lots of playing. There's no easy answers to all this stuff, right? You just have to keep working on it. That's what makes jazz so much fun. That's what makes music so much fun, right? It's just the exploration part of it, and just being able to do I mean, there's just so much you can practice for the rest of your life, and I think that's what makes it so much fun. So I hope some of that helped. That was just a brief summary of the podcast this week. Be sure to check that out again at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 64. Listen to that whole episode. We come out with one every single Monday. Also just had a really great interview with pianist, composer, saxophone player Jeff Schneider today for a future podcast episode. It's going to be a really awesome one, so always keep a lookout for that. All right, I thought I saw something come up in the feed, so I'm going to take a look at it. Dirk, thanks for joining us. Mauro, I try to think of the melody there you go. I try to think of the melody at all times. Easy to get lost when others are soloing, but if I have the melody in my mind, it helps. Awesome. I think you actually wrote that right as I was saying it. That's awesome, Mauro. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, indeed. If you're playing that melody in your head, it's so much easier to stay on track. It's so much easier to focus, and again, mapping out that stuff, mapping out different parts of the melody, where it goes to, and different parts of the song. It's all about getting better ears, right? When it comes to jazz and a lot of other styles of music, it's all about just getting sharper ears, more attuned to these sorts of things. All right, well, guys, I want to thank you so much for joining me, whether you're listening live right now, whether you're listening from the replay. I really appreciate it. If you like this stuff, let me know. I'm trying to come on once a week just to talk about the podcast, and if you guys have any other questions that you think that I can answer, or this is, again, just a place for us all to help each other out. If anybody has anything to add to anything I'm saying, feel free to leave comments and all that stuff. Pablo, you are so welcome. I really appreciate you being here. And again, learnjazzstandards.com if you're not familiar. We have blog posts, jazz lessons, and all kinds of stuff coming out every single week to help you become a better jazz musician, and a new podcast episode every single Monday. They're on YouTube. They're also on iTunes. And of course, they're at learnjazzstandards.com/podcast, the LJS podcast. You can always check it out. And we're really trying to have lots of different guests on. And by the way, if you guys ever have any suggestions for podcast episodes, feel free. Alexander, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's very kind words. Appreciate you saying that. If you ever have any suggestions for the podcast, let me know. I'm always checking the different mediums, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, our website. Feel free to leave suggestions. I just had an email this morning come in. Some guy gave me 4 different ideas of things that would help him and his students, and that's so cool. I really appreciate that kind of stuff, so feel free to do that. Okay, and by the way, if you haven't, be sure to join our jazz community at learnjazzstandards.com/newsletter. You do get a free ebook, Our Ultimate Jazz Guide to Practicing. We have about 25,000 or so people have that book now, so join the ranks, go get your ebook over there. Be sure to join our jazz community. All right, guys, well, I've got to get ready for my gig. Again, thank you so much for everybody for sticking around and being here. I'll see you next time. Josh, thanks for these tools. Just getting into listening and reading your material, trying to get up my game as an adult who's getting back to playing after many years. You may be the help I need. Josh, I'm really glad to be of any help that I can. There's so much on learnjazzstandards.com. Seriously, just go into the search bar and look something up, and you may find what you need. And every week, more stuff coming out. All right, guys, I got to get ready for my gig. It's that time. But I'll see you guys next week. I really appreciate it. And until next time, be sure to check out that podcast episode, learnjazzstandards.com/episode 64. See you guys next time.